We set off just before dawn, backpacks stuffed to the brim and shoulders already aching from the weight of our gear. As we stepped onto the trail at Cedar Ridge, a mix of excitement and unease twisted in my stomach. The path clung to a steep slope, the ground damp and cool beneath my boots. Jake led the way, whistling off-key, while Mark brought up the rear, constantly adjusting the straps on his pack. I took the middle spot, senses unusually sharp as we ventured deeper. Overhead, the dense canopy filtered the early morning light, leaving the forest in a dim, misty haze. Each breath tasted of wet leaves and earth. I kept scanning the trees, searching for any sign of movement or other hikers, but the place felt empty. Not silent, though. A distant stream gurgled somewhere ahead, and now and then, a branch snapped, its sharp echo bouncing through the valley. The first few miles went smoothly, winding through narrow switchbacks and past clusters of low shrubs. At one point, I slipped on loose gravel, nearly going down before Jake yanked me back up. He laughed, cracking a joke about my terrible balance. I forced a grin but couldn't shake the creeping feeling that we weren't alone. The morning stretched on, and by midday, shafts of sunlight finally broke through the foliage, casting patches of brightness onto the trail. We stopped at a rocky overlook, catching our breath as we gazed down at a valley blanketed in evergreens. Mark grumbled about wanting lunch, but Jake insisted we push for another hour, hoping to reach Echo Lake before taking a longer break. The final stretch to the lake was grueling. My shoulders ached, sweat clung to every inch of my skin, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The air grew dense, and even Mark's dumb jokes about some hermit who supposedly roamed these hills couldn't lighten the mood. Jake rolled his eyes, but I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual. When we finally reached Echo Lake, it was breathtaking, a perfect mirror reflecting the sky, framed by jagged rocks. We dropped our packs and collapsed onto the nearest boulders, exhaustion washing over us. Jake got to work setting up the tents while Mark gathered fallen branches for the fire. I stood at the water's edge, staring at the glassy surface, uneasy about just how still it was. After settling in, we lit a small fire. The flickering flames cast warm light against the encroaching darkness, and for a moment, we allowed ourselves to relax. We passed around a canteen, sipping water that had never tasted so refreshing. The night swallowed the world beyond our camp, reducing it to rustling leaves and shifting shadows. Every so often, I tensed at a sudden sound, much to Jake and Mark's amusement. They teased me for being jumpy, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something felt off. To distract myself, I focused on organizing my gear while we shared stories from past trips, arguing over who carried the heaviest pack and what lay ahead. The steady rhythm of the fire and Jake's easy laughter nearly lulled me into comfort. Almost. That first night in the wilderness, our guard dropped. Our minds sought rest. And yet, a subtle awareness took root, an inkling that we weren't truly alone. Maybe it was the eerie stillness when the wind abruptly died, or the suffocating darkness beyond the fire's glow. Either way, unease settled over me as we finally crawled into our tents. This was supposed to be a 5-day trek, an adventure, but as Cedar Ridge faded behind us, it felt more like an invitation into something unknowable. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Jake unzipping his tent, groaning about sore muscles. My own body felt battered, and Mark looked like he hadn't slept a wink. None of us admitted it, but the uneasy silence of the night had unsettled us. Breakfast was a quick, tasteless affair of oatmeal. Then we packed up, eager to move on. The path ahead narrowed, trees pressing in from both sides, turning the trail into a claustrophobic corridor. The occasional gust of wind stirred the branches, creating a whispering sound that faded far too quickly. We trudged on in near silence, stepping over gnarled roots and skirting around muddy patches. By midday, we reached a marker pointing toward Hollow Brook. Jake had read about it, a shallow stream perfect for refilling canteens. But none of us were prepared for how overgrown it was. Thick moss coated the trees and rocks, muffling even our footsteps. As we filtered water, I noticed footprints in the damp soil. Deep, wide, fresh. Mark shrugged it off as an old hiker's tracks. Jake and I weren't so sure. Later, we emerged into a sunlit clearing near Moonlight Lake, a welcome break from the oppressive woods. Felt like stumbling into an oasis. We decided to camp there, eager for a more restful night. But as darkness fell, a chill crept into the air. Jake swore he saw movement across the water. Mark shined his flashlight, but we saw only our warped reflections rippling in the lake. We laughed it off, but every snapped twig sent tension crackling through the camp. Then Jake pulled out a small pouch mushrooms. Mark grinned. I hesitated but was outvoted. We only took a little, enough for a mild trip. First, nothing. Then, the forest seemed to pulse, shadows shifting in unnatural ways. Something darted behind a tree. I called out, but Jake and Mark were still by the fire, oblivious. My skin prickled. Maybe it was just the mushrooms. Maybe not. That night, none of us slept. We kept hearing movement, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. By dawn, we were exhausted. The climb ahead loomed, but we barely spoke, our nerves frayed. The final night, as we neared the trail's end, we found a secluded clearing and set up camp. As we sat by the fire, exhaustion melting into relief, we heard footsteps. A man emerged from the darkness. He was stocky, wearing a tattered coat, with a sunken left cheek that gave his face a lopsided look. His voice was low, garbled. He asked to share our fire. We made space more out of fear than kindness. He smelled of sweat and earth. As we spoke, his words took a chilling turn. He told a story of hikers making noise, disturbing the peace. His details were too precise. He had been watching us. When he asked if we were armed, Jake hesitated, then said, "We have something." The man smiled, eyes gleaming. "Good. You never know who's out here." The firelight flickered, shadows lengthening. He went on, speaking of old families in the hills, people who didn't take kindly to outsiders. His tale ended with a warning. Hikers who overstayed their welcome learned the hard way who truly owned these woods. Then he stood, limping into the dark. More than one set of footsteps faded with him. Panic gripped us. We tore down camp in minutes, shoving gear into our packs. Mark clutched his handgun. My flashlight swept the trees, expecting movement. We fled, hearts hammering, stumbling through the night. Every snapped branch sent fresh terror through me. Hours later, we stopped, breathless. Had we outrun them? The woods loomed, silent but watching. Exhaustion took over, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, ears straining for the sound of unseen watchers. Morning would bring escape, but something told me we hadn't truly left those woods behind. Some part of us would always remain there, haunted by what lurked beyond the firelight, waiting. The sun blazed overhead as our old station wagon rattled along the winding dirt path. My grandfather, Henry, gripped the wheel with determination, set on finding the perfect picnic spot he'd been talking about for days. My grandmother, Evelyn, sat stiffly beside him, feigning composure. In the back, I was wedged between my aunts, Carol and Marie, who were squabbling over space. My mother attempted to play peacemaker, but her voice was nearly drowned out by the crunch of gravel under the tires. At last, Henry spotted a clearing and pulled over. I was relieved to escape the cramped car, but my excitement quickly faded. The air hung heavy, oddly motionless, as if the forest was holding its breath. Normally, I'd be darting off to gather wildflowers or climbing fallen logs, but something urged me to stay near the others. As we unloaded the trunk, Evelyn spread a blanket over a patch of grass, while Mom fussed over a basket of sandwiches. Henry, never one to explain himself, abruptly announced he was heading beyond the tree line to look for something. The rest of us remained in the clearing, pretending not to wonder why he had wandered off without another word. My aunts, usually eager to explore, instead busied themselves with cups and plates, hesitant to stray too far. While setting the table, Carol elbowed me and nodded toward a mound of freshly disturbed earth just beyond the sunlit patch. partially concealed by the shade of an ancient oak. Stones were scattered on top, almost as if marking a grave. It was too large for a small animal like a rabbit or a fox. A chill settled in my stomach. I glanced at Evelyn, hoping for reassurance, but she avoided my eyes. Instead, she told us firmly to leave it alone. The slight tremor in her voice made it clear she lacked an explanation. Marie and Carol brushed it off, murmuring that the woods were full of odd sights, but I could tell they were uneasy. Our usual chatter dwindled. Even Mom fell uncharacteristically silent. Evelyn focused on laying out napkins, though her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. We pressed on, setting out the food, trying to salvage the outing. For a brief moment, it felt normal again, until Marie stiffened and pointed. A thick branch arched above us, and from it hung a rope, a noose tied at the end, swaying ever so slightly in the newfound breeze. We all froze. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a leftover trap or part of some hunting setup. But a deep dread crawled through me. This wasn't something people simply forgot about. Evelyn mumbled that it was nothing to worry about, but her pale face betrayed her words. We sat motionless, scanning the woods, waiting for Henry to return and wishing we hadn't come so far from home. The silence became unbearable. Every distant rustle of leaves made us flinch. What had started as a joyful picnic had turned into an eerie vigil over that mound and that rope. Then, from deep in the trees, a rhythmic thudding began. First so faint I thought I imagined it. Then it grew distinct. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. Another pause. Over and over. Mom stiffened. No one spoke. The sound unsettled me more than any sudden crash could have. It felt intentional, like someone was sending a message. Marie murmured, "Maybe it's just hunters?" But Carol cut her off with a sharp shake of her head. We all knew this didn't sound like any hunting call we had ever heard. The steady, drum-like pulsing continued, and the tension climbed. Evelyn bent down and started gathering the cups and plates, as if tidying up would somehow banish the strange sound. The clinking of plastic was absurdly loud in the hush of the clearing. Then the voices began, a low, layered humming that blurred together, impossible to count how many people were out there. The sound fused with the drum beats until the air itself seemed to hum. I felt it in my ribs, a pulse that wouldn't stop. Evelyn caught my gaze. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but she didn't. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all had the same realization. We might not be alone. And with Henry gone, we were trapped. The chanting grew louder, carrying a rhythm too deliberate to be random. A few times, I swore I saw movement between the trees, but whenever I focused, it was gone, swallowed by shifting shadows. Carol clutched my arm and pointed toward the mound. It hadn't changed, but somehow it felt more ominous, like it was tied to the sound vibrating through the woods. My breath came shallow, and I knew everyone else felt the same suffocating fear. We huddled together, barely aware of the food strewn around us. All that mattered was seeing Henry return. Then, suddenly, he burst from the trees, crashing through the underbrush. His shout tore through the clearing, his face wild with panic. For a moment, none of us moved. We had never seen him afraid. Evelyn sprang into action, grabbing whatever she could. Mom shoved us to our feet and we ran. Henry's urgency was enough to push us forward, faster than our fear had allowed before. As we sprinted, I risked a glance back. The chanting had risen to a deafening level, echoing between the trees. Though I saw no one, the sound surrounded us. It felt as if unseen eyes were watching from all sides. By the time we reached the car, my hands were shaking too badly to close the door properly. Henry slammed his own shut, started the engine, and gunned it down the path. The clearing vanished behind us, but the sound lingered, a dark echo that refused to let go. Henry drove like a man possessed, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as if expecting something to emerge from the trees. Evelyn, usually calm, trembled visibly. My aunts, flanking me, kept whipping their heads around to check if we were being followed. Mom pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, silent. The chanting may have faded, but the memory of it clung to us. The road was rough, bouncing us around, our abandoned picnic rattling in the trunk. Part of me feared the car would stall, leaving us stranded, but Henry kept going, maneuvering around every obstacle as though he had memorized the path. At last, we hit the main road. The trees thinned, replaced by open fields, and I had never been so relieved to see the sky. No one spoke. The silence in the car was thick, suffocating. We all had questions, but knew Henry wouldn't answer. When we finally reached home, he threw the car into park and marched inside without a word. Evelyn and Mom started unloading the mess from the trunk, but none of us knew what to do. Sandwiches were crushed, blankets dirted, plates scattered. It was all meaningless now. I followed Henry inside, the weight of unspoken questions pressing down on me. In the kitchen, he stood rigid against the counter, staring at the floor. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely steady. His head snapped up, eyes dark with something unreadable. "Don't ever ask me about it again," he said, voice hard as stone. A door slammed shut between us. Mom and Evelyn stepped in, just as stunned. We all knew better than to push. Henry had drawn a line. In the days that followed, we danced around the subject, waiting for him to explain. He never did. I lay awake that night, the drumbeats echoing in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the rope swaying from that gnarled branch. Years have passed, but the memory refuses to fade. Whatever Henry saw that day, it haunted him to the end of his life. And sometimes, even now, I find myself listening for distant drumbeats, half expecting that eerie chanting to return and find me again. About a month ago, my friend asked if anyone had ever had odd encounters in the mountains of northern Georgia and a few nearby areas. At the time, I was too busy to respond, but my husband and I did have an experience there that I believe is worth sharing. Most of our family doesn't know because we understand how they'd react, so we've kept it to ourselves. While I realize this post describes some unusual events, my husband and I both experienced what I'm about to recount exactly as I'll describe. I understand that not everyone will believe me, but since this is deeply personal, I just ask that everyone keep comments respectful regardless of their opinions. Thank you. Some background is needed to explain factors that may have contributed to what happened. I suspect that the events leading up to our trip to Georgia were connected to how intense things became while we were there. Neither my husband nor I had ever planned to get married, but when we met, that changed. We got engaged at 30 and 27 and had a 2-year engagement. We wanted our wedding to be meaningful and chose a completely non-traditional ceremony. His large family wanted a classic church wedding, which put us at odds with them from the start. As soon as we announced our plans, we began experiencing an unusual streak of bad luck, along with minor poltergeist-like activity in our home. Most of it was small stuff we brushed off except for one incident. One day, we left the house and came back to find a red clown nose sitting on our bathroom sink. No one had keys to our place, and we definitely didn't own a clown nose. That one shook us. When I told a friend something strange was happening, so much so that it almost felt like our wedding was cursed, he tried to reason it away. I said, "Watch, something is going to happen today while he's getting his tux. I just know it." My friend gave me a skeptical look, but then, right at that moment, my fiancé called. While he was being fitted, there had been a freak accident in the parking lot. Someone had totaled the back end of his truck. That shut my friend up. Another issue arose when I refused to have my father walk me down the aisle. I also refused to choose a random stand-in just for tradition's sake. Instead, I asked my younger brother, who was thrilled. We'd had problems in the past, but he had been clean for 7 years, and we had finally reconciled after the loss of our middle brother to a drunk driver. That tragedy had driven us apart for a while, but eventually brought us closer. Then, just over a month before the wedding, my younger brother passed unexpectedly in his mid-20s. My fiancée and I drove nearly 20 hours to West Virginia to say goodbye. I knew my brother well enough to know he wouldn't cross over easily, especially not with my wedding so close and me counting on him. It weighed on me. His viewing was private, for immediate family only. He wasn't embalmed because of the required autopsy, so he was covered with a handmade quilt up to his chin. We were told not to touch him, but we did anyway. After saying our goodbyes, I walked to the foot of the gurney, placed my hands on his feet like in prayer, and spoke to him. I told him I knew it was an accident and that I forgave him. I told him that if he felt he still needed to make amends, he could do so by calling forth our loved ones and my fiancé's loved ones to witness the wedding from beyond. I named them: our other brother, my fiancé's sister, our grandparents, aunts, and friends. Every beloved soul who had already passed. I told him if he did this, there would be no debt between us, and he could rest in peace. The looks on my family's faces were priceless, but it felt like something I had to offer. Back in Louisiana, I had a pendant made featuring my favorite picture of my two brothers. I wrapped it around my bouquet. While it looked like I walked down the aisle alone, I knew my brothers were beside me in spirit. They would never miss their sister's wedding, especially not with my younger brother pulling them across the veil, making up for what he must have felt was his final duty to me. After the wedding, my husband Aaron and I went to a cabin on Bear Ridge for our honeymoon week. I won't name the specific cabin, but I'll say it was very rocky with a raccoon theme. Bear Ridge is in Blue Ridge, outside of Chattanooga in the Appalachian Mountains. Since I had been living in New Orleans, I brought a bunch of freshly picked magnolia blossoms with me. They were an offering of gratitude to the mountain for hosting us. No rituals, just a simple act. I arranged them on a wooden box with a decorative bird and nest that sat on the porch railing and sent up feelings of joy and thanks. That night, we went out to eat and grabbed groceries. When we got back, the wooden bird box was shattered all over the porch. It must have hit the ground hard to break into so many pieces. We assumed a raccoon or bear had knocked it over. Then I noticed something odd. There were no flowers. The leaves scattered around the porch were exactly how we had left them, yet the heavier magnolias were gone. I searched around the stairs and walkway but found nothing. The next morning, while picking some honeysuckle about 20 feet from the porch, I glanced down and did a double take. There were my magnolias, piled up and flattened as thin as paper. There were no footprints, but it looked like something had deliberately stomped them multiple times. It left me feeling uneasy, but I laughed at myself for thinking the mountain didn't like my offering. That first night, Aaron woke suddenly to the sound of something big hitting the wooden support beams under the cabin. The front half of the cabin was suspended about 15 feet off the ground on thick posts, as it was built on a slope. He said the impacts were so strong the mirror on the wall vibrated. Each time he started to drift back to sleep, another loud bang would jolt him awake. Finally, he got up, but right as he reached to wake me, a deafening slap came from the area near the kitchen, just a few feet from the bed. He described it as sounding like a heavy book dropping from a high shelf, but there was nothing there. He frantically tried to wake me, but I was in such a deep sleep he thought something was wrong. He could barely tell I was breathing. Then, a metallic jingling sound started up behind the old TV on the opposite side of the cabin. He said it lasted forever, but he was too afraid to check, especially since it was near the big windows where he had heard the noises. The jangling finally woke me. I remember how hard it was to surface from unconsciousness, like trying to swim through thick darkness. My mind was so foggy I barely reacted. Aaron told me what had happened, but I was overwhelmed with exhaustion and just lay there in a daze until morning. Normally, I'm a very light sleeper, especially in unfamiliar places. But during this trip, the moment my head hit the pillow, it was as if I fell into a coma. It wasn't a restful sleep. It felt like I had to claw my way back to consciousness each morning, leaving me exhausted both day and night. That was just the beginning. What followed over the next several nights would make even the most skeptical person question what they believe. I've been working at this nature reserve in Wisconsin for a while now, and usually the biggest surprises I deal with are the occasional lost camper or an unexpected downpour. That all changed one evening when a storm rolled in with a vengeance. Rain pounded against the metal roof of the small entrance station where I was posted, and the wind howled so fiercely that the windows rattled in their frames. Every lightning strike illuminated the forest in stark, ghostly flashes, and each time, I had the unsettling feeling that the trees were moving in ways they shouldn't. I was due to clock out soon, but my boss radioed in, warning that the roads were starting to flood and I should pack up before things got worse. I'd dealt with bad weather here before. Heck, I'd spent countless rough nights working in this park, but something about this storm felt off. The booth's dim light barely cut through the sheets of rain battering the dirt road. Beyond that, the shadows bled together like ink spreading on damp paper. After securing the lock on the cash box, I stuffed my gear into my bag. The moment I stepped outside, the rain slammed into me, drenching me instantly. Water pooled around my boots, and my flashlight's jittery beam bounced wildly off the downpour, making it hard to distinguish between swaying branches and something else. A deafening crack of thunder nearly made me drop my keys. The rumble reverberated in my chest as I fumbled with the booth's door lock. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of motion. It wasn't just the wind or a trick of the storm. A figure stood deeper in the gloom, tall and unnervingly thin. Its movements were unnatural, like a creature struggling to walk upright when it wasn't meant to. The rain poured down my face, but I couldn't look away, because whatever it was watching me. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or some other harmless animal, but my gut screamed otherwise. Snapping out of my daze, I bolted for my truck, each step sending water splashing up my legs. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key into the door. When I finally got inside, soaked to the bone and breathing hard, I turned the key in the ignition, only to hear the dreaded click of a dead battery. Cursing under my breath, I tried again. This time, the engine sputtered before roaring to life. Another flash of lightning lit up the night, and for a brief, horrifying second, I saw that figure closer than before, its limbs bent at disturbing angles. I threw the truck into drive and tore out of there faster than I'd ever left park property before. My radio, which should have been crackling with my supervisor's voice, was nothing but static. Normally, these radios work through storms without a problem, but now all I got was eerie white noise. The rain hammered my windshield as I navigated the slick, winding road back toward the main lodge. My tires skidded more than once, and it felt like the storm itself was trying to keep me from making it back. Several times, I thought I saw something darting between the trees just beyond the reach of my headlights. When I finally rolled into the lot, relief washed over me. The warm glow of the office lights was a welcome sight, a promise of normalcy. As I slowed to park, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. But then, something lean and impossibly fast dashed across my headlight's beam. It was thinner than anything human, its limbs too long, its posture unsettlingly predatory. I killed the engine and sat in stunned silence, heart pounding. Rain drummed against the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but my focus was locked on the darkness beyond the lot. Nothing moved, but the hair on the back of my neck refused to settle. I needed to get inside and tell someone what I'd seen, but for a long moment, I just sat there, trying to convince myself that I hadn't witnessed something impossible. Eventually, I forced myself out of the truck and into the office, leaving a trail of water across the floor. I wasn't sure how to explain that I'd seen something that wasn't a normal animal. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just on edge. But deep down, I knew the reserve had changed that night, and I had a gut feeling that this was only the beginning. I've always thought of myself as level-headed, but after that night, I noticed I was always on high alert. Every snapped twig, every rustling leaf had me turning sharply, expecting to see something lurking. My coworkers teased me for being jumpy, but they hadn't experienced what I had. It was like the forest had shifted overnight, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. A week later, I was assigned the final trail check before closing. It's a routine duty: walk the main loop, call out a few "anyone still out here?" lines, and make sure no hikers were left behind. I set out around 9 p.m. with my headlamp and gear. The park officially shuts down at 11 o'clock, but we start clearing people out early. From the start, something felt different. The first half mile was eerily silent. No owls, no crickets, nothing. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud. Then, a putrid stench hit me, like wet fur mixed with decaying leaves. I pulled my jacket over my nose and swept my headlamp across the trees, but nothing looked out of place. Still, the smell thickened as I moved forward. Just as I considered turning back, an unearthly noise shattered the silence. A sound so warped, so inhuman, that my blood ran cold. It was a drawn-out, layered wail, like multiple voices crying out at once. A second call answered from behind me. The echoes made it impossible to tell where it was coming from, only that it was getting closer. I've dealt with all kinds of wildlife in this park, but nothing made noises like that. Another cry rang out, closer this time. Instinct took over. I turned and sprinted back down the trail, my headlamp swinging wildly as I ran. Something was following me, matching my pace. Leaves crunched in time with my own steps, making my skin crawl. The winding path forced me to slow down at certain turns, leaving me feeling painfully exposed. My breath came in ragged gasps, my sweat mixing with the chill night air. Then, finally, I saw the faint glow of the trailhead lantern. Pushing myself harder, I stumbled onto the main path and into the open. The second I turned around, the forest went silent. Whatever had been chasing me had vanished or was waiting. My hands shook as I texted my supervisor, keeping the details vague. I climbed into my truck, locked the doors, and stared at the black trees beyond my headlights. They revealed nothing, but I knew something was there. After that night, I started noticing things. Deep gouges in the fence near the lodge, unidentifiable tracks in the mud, that same rancid smell lingering in strange places. My coworkers laughed it off, but I stopped ignoring the signs. Something was in these woods. At home, I dug through my grandfather's old chest, pulling out a protective charm I hadn't touched in years. A small carved talisman, both reassuring and ominous. Felt right to have it with me, because the sightings weren't stopping. And I was sure of one thing now: this reserve wasn't ours after dark. And whatever was out there, it wasn't leaving anytime soon. Every summer for the past several years, a group of my friends and I have traveled from our homes in Manchester, England, to the rural Highlands of Scotland. The region is home to one of the most expansive forests in the UK, Breckland Forest Reserve. It's as remote as it gets for this part of the world, with sections of the woods so thick and untouched that it feels like no one has stepped foot there for centuries. Our yearly trips always brought us a sense of peace, clarity, and a deep appreciation for nature. But last year's visit ended in one of the most terrifying and disturbing experiences of my entire life. One that completely changed the way I perceive both the world and the human mind. Every year, we take an overnight bus across the border, then hike out to a secluded place called Loch Caburn, a private fishing lake supposedly reserved for a local angling club. They ensure the waters are always stocked full of fish, which makes it easy for us to quickly catch enough for a small meal. I'm talking about 45 minutes max, and we'd be sorted. Any experienced angler will tell you that's unbelievably fast for a decent catch. But last year, we got tired of the same routine and set our sights on somewhere new. A map showed another deep lake about 30 miles east called Loch Darrow. We figured it would be a perfect fishing spot, and we were right. Sure, it wasn't as easy as the private lake, but at least we weren't sneaking onto restricted property. Everything was going great. That was until the second night. While we were sitting around a campfire, having a few drinks, one of my mates suddenly jumped up from his seat and backed away from the flames. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice calm at first, more puzzled than afraid. "Who's who?" someone replied lazily. "Someone's moving through the trees back there." He pointed at the woods right behind where I was sitting. At first, I let out a short laugh, thinking he was just trying to mess with us. But the moment I realized he was serious, a cold fear jolted through me. I stood up, spun around, and shined my torch into the darkness. You could feel the unease among us as we scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. Flashlights flickered across trunks and undergrowth, but there was nothing, no trace of anyone. "Hello?" one of us called out, only to be immediately shushed by the rest. No one wanted to give away our location, but at the same time, we needed to know if someone was out there watching us. Again, nothing, just silence. "I think you've had one too many, mate," I told him, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm fine," he shot back, his voice shaky. "I barely touched my bottle. I swear to God, I saw someone." "Like who?" another asked. "Man? Woman? Young? Old?" I don't know," he admitted, his voice unsteady. "But they were massive. The only big thing around here is your imagination, mate," someone muttered. "Get some rest. It's been a long day," and it had. No one really sleeps on the overnight bus to Scotland. They close their eyes, put on some relaxing music, but they never fully sleep. So, by the end of the first day, we were all exhausted. Normally, that first night at camp is when we sleep the hardest, but not that night. None of us could fully relax, not with the thought of someone possibly lurking in the woods. The next morning, we felt even worse. We were supposed to spend the day fishing, but after the uneasy night, we barely had the energy for it. We still grabbed our gear and made our way down to the lake. It was a beautiful spot, a clear blue body of water surrounded by rolling hills. Scotland gets its fair share of sunshine in the summer, but that day, the sky was covered in thick, grim clouds, like the sun had barely bothered to rise. I was tired, damp from the drizzle, and not particularly excited about fishing. In fact, I found myself hoping something interesting would happen to break the monotony. And, unfortunately, my wish was granted. "Look!" one of us shouted. "Over there on the other side of the lake. Do you see that?" It was the same mate who had seen something the night before. While one sighting could be brushed off as a trick of the eye, a second one, that was harder to dismiss. "There," he insisted, pointing across the water. "Something just stepped out of the trees. Then it disappeared. Please tell me you saw that." "Calm down," someone said. "It's probably just." "I know what I saw," he cut them off. "And we need to get the hell out of these woods now." He scrambled to gather his gear, practically running back to camp. One of the lads followed him, trying to calm him down, but it was no use. He was panicked, genuinely terrified of whatever had briefly emerged from the trees on the far side of the lake. I asked the others if they had seen anything. They shook their heads. None of us had any idea what he was talking about, but that didn't mean we weren't just as unnerved by his reaction. We were supposed to stay for a full week, but that second night ended up being our last. We managed to talk our frightened friend into staying at least another night. After all, we had come all this way, and I wasn't about to let someone's nerves ruin the whole trip. But that wasn't the end of it. In the middle of the night, the same guy suddenly burst out of his tent, waking all of us. "Do you hear that?" he asked. There was silence, absolute silence. I strained my ears, trying to pick up on whatever had him so spooked, but I heard nothing. Just the faint rustling of sleeping bags as the others sat up in confusion. He was scratching at his ears, clenching his jaw, rocking back and forth in the dirt as if some unbearable sound was torturing him. And then, all at once, we realized the truth. There was no sound, no lurking figure. It was all in his head. He was having a complete psychological breakdown, and whatever he thought was out there, it wasn't real. This is a warning. I beg you, I implore you. Please do not go hiking in the forests around Ashfield, Vermont. I know those woods better than most. I was playing in them with my younger cousin when I was still in elementary school. So trust me when I say something out there is changing, and not for the better. I first realized something was terribly wrong during a hike a few weeks ago in early spring. Every year, birds migrate back from the warmer southern regions to reclaim their northern territories. Thousands upon thousands of tiny songbirds usually fill the trees around Green Mountain during March, each singing what seems like a cheerful tune but is actually a battle cry, a challenge for others to claim their perch. But as I trudged through the previous season's dried leaves, I couldn't hear a single sound. No birds, no animals at all. It was as if the forest had been abandoned. This made me uneasy for two reasons. First, Animals have an incredible ability to sense danger in ways that humans can't. Their hearing, sense of smell, and general awareness are far more developed than ours. If all the wildlife had fled or refused to return, that could mean something terrible was lurking nearby. Second, forests only fall silent like that when a major predator is around. Birds go dead silent when a bear or a cougar is prowling, hoping to avoid attention. Sometimes they stay hidden and the predator moves on. Sometimes they don't. Either way, wandering around when something like that is nearby is a terrible idea. So, I decided to head back to my car. That's when something truly strange happened. Let me remind you, I've been roaming the woods around Green Mountain since I was a little kid. Our house was miles away, but thanks to our bikes, we had a huge area to explore during summer breaks. I know those woods well, and yet somehow I got lost. The first sign was a dull headache creeping in. I stopped walking for a moment, rubbing my temples and the bridge of my nose, hoping to shake it off. But when I opened my eyes and looked around, a cold panic gripped me. I didn't recognize my surroundings. I cannot overstate how deeply unsettling that was. To be somewhere I had visited countless times, only for it to feel utterly foreign. I pulled out my compass to get my bearings. To my surprise, the needle kept spinning. Even when I held it steady, it would slowly start shifting again. That was unsettling, but not an unsolvable problem. There are other ways to navigate, like checking which side of the tree moss grows on. Typically the north side since it gets the least sunlight. But as I inspected the trees, I realized something was off. The sun was in the southern part of the sky, yet the moss was mostly growing on the southern side of the trunks. Maybe that wasn't impossible, but it didn't make any sense. The more things stopped making sense, the more panic bubbled in my chest. But panic in a situation like this is an invitation for disaster. I forced myself to stay calm, assured myself there was a reasonable explanation, and walked in the direction I was almost certain the nearest road was. That's when I stumbled upon something I had never seen before, something that did not belong there. All the years I had spent exploring those woods, I had never come across an old, rundown cabin. And I mean old, it couldn't have been built any later than the late 70s. How had my cousin and I missed it all those years? It made no sense. The logical thing to do was knock on the door and see if anyone was inside. As much as I hated the idea, I was lost, and asking for directions seemed like the best option. But as I stepped closer, a strange sensation washed over me. I told myself it was exhaustion, maybe low blood sugar. I don't know. But with each step, my legs grew heavier, and a deep unease settled in my gut. By the time I raised my fist to knock on the door, it felt like something was physically pushing me away, whispering in my mind, *leave. Do not enter. Do not look back. *. I knocked anyway. The door creaked open slightly, revealing the decayed interior. The locks had long since rusted away, and the inside was just as decrepit as the outside. But something was odd. The furniture, though covered in dust, was arranged in an orderly way, as if someone or something visited occasionally. Then my eyes landed on something in the corner, and my breath caught in my throat. It's hard to describe what I saw. It was a wooden idol of some sort, placed atop a stone altar. But my brain couldn't process it. The shape, the details, nothing registered as familiar. It was like my mind refused to comprehend what I was seeing. And with that, my headache surged back, stronger than before, along with a suffocating wave of dread. I cannot explain how I knew, but I knew that twisted mass of wood, twigs, and vines was something evil. Pure, unfiltered evil. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I bolted from that cabin like a terrified child. And here's the worst part. When I entered that cabin, it was still daylight. I couldn't have been inside for more than a couple of minutes. At least that's how it felt. But when I burst through the door, it was night. I ran until I found the road. Ran until I reached my car. And I drove like hell until I was safely back home. I haven't been able to talk about that day until now. I tried telling a friend of mine once, but the words just wouldn't come out. But please heed my warning. Do not go hiking in the forests around Ashfield, Vermont. The most chilling story I ever heard was told to me by my grandfather. He had been a soldier in World War II, enlisting on the day he turned 18, March 5, 1943. Because of the timing, he missed the D-Day invasion and all its horrors, but he arrived at the Western Front just in time to take part in something arguably even more dreadful: the push into enemy territory. Looking back, with the clarity that only hindsight provides, it's easy to see that Germany was bound to lose the war, crushed between the advancing Allied and Soviet forces. But in the thick of battle, moving through the fields and forests of Europe, the outcome felt far from certain. In fact, the German forces still believed they could snatch victory through the use of advanced weaponry, unyielding defensive strategies, or a combination of both. They weren't ready to surrender, and my grandfather found himself caught in one of the most nightmarish phases of the conflict. A brutal fight into the German heartland that proved just as terrifying, if not worse, than anything that had come before. On the 4th of October, 1944, the battle for a key German city began. The city had been integrated into an extensive defensive network along Germany's Western Front, and the Allies hoped to seize it quickly before moving into a heavily industrialized region to cripple the enemy's manufacturing power. However, just south of the city lay a dense forest, Hürtgenwald, where over 80,000 German soldiers were entrenched. The U.S. forces were tasked with keeping them occupied, preventing reinforcements from bolstering the city's defenses. It was there, in that grim woodland, that my grandfather's ordeal unfolded. His platoon had been ordered to conduct a routine patrol, probing enemy defenses so they could call in air and artillery strikes. The morning had been eerily quiet, but that silence was shattered when a rifle shot rang out, and one of his fellow soldiers collapsed into the dirt. Scrambling for what little cover they could find, it took several agonizing minutes to determine where the shot had come from. In that time, 3 or 4 more men were picked off by the unseen marksman. Some of the soldiers attempted to retreat under the covering fire of their comrades, but the sniper expertly cut them down before they could escape. Before long, the entire platoon was trapped, unable to move without inviting death. But as terrifying as the situation was, it wasn't the part that haunted them most. That came next. The radio operator had been among the first to fall, bleeding out quickly in a small clearing. Every time someone tried to retrieve the radio to call for backup, the sniper fired a warning shot, ensuring they kept their distance. One particularly brave soldier managed to grab the device, but with incredible accuracy or sheer luck, the sniper's bullet tore through his hand, rendering it useless. To their growing horror, they realized there was no way to summon reinforcements. More than 20 men were now completely at the mercy of a single German sniper. My grandfather recalled that every time a soldier shifted even slightly, perhaps attempting to glimpse the sniper's position, another shot rang out and another man fell. Each time the sniper landed a shot, he laughed, a chilling, gleeful sound that echoed through the trees. My grandfather said that laugh was something he would never forget, the sheer joy in the enemy's voice every time a bullet found its mark. Sometimes, the sniper would yell something in German, a phrase my grandfather didn't understand at the time but later learned translated to something like, "No more tears, little children." For 6 long hours, the sniper held the platoon hostage, though to them, it felt like an eternity. They lay motionless, trapped among their fallen comrades, the lifeless eyes of their friends staring at them in frozen expressions of terror and pain. And when the sniper could no longer find living targets, he turned his aim on the dead. My grandfather and the others recoiled in horror as a bullet struck the skull of a soldier who had died leaning against a tree. He had been out of the fight for hours, yet the sniper continued shooting, as if trying to break them mentally. My grandfather said that of all the wounds he had seen in the war, head injuries were the worst. The first bullet split the man's head nearly in half. My grandfather described it in grim detail, how someone he had known for months, someone whose silhouette he could recognize even in darkness, was now utterly unrecognizable. His eyes were too far apart, he had said. He didn't look human anymore, but the sniper wasn't done. He kept laughing as he fired again and again and again. 2 bullets, then 3, then 4, until the man's skull was reduced to fragments, his brain leaking onto the forest floor. His eyes, still attached by their optical nerves, dangled grotesquely from shattered sockets. I can't begin to imagine how horrific that must have been for a kid barely 18 years old. I think back to myself at that age. I could barely handle a scraped knee, let alone the sight of someone's head being obliterated in front of me. The platoon remained trapped until nightfall, waiting for darkness to cover their escape. As they finally made their move, the sniper's mocking voice rang through the trees, calling them cowards in between fits of maniacal laughter. My grandfather fully expected to be shot as he fled, dodging trees in the darkness. One soldier, so paralyzed with fear, ran straight into a tree and broke his nose, but he simply got up and kept running, desperate to escape that nightmare. Grandpa passed away last year, and I consider this a small tribute to a man who endured horrors I can hardly fathom. Rest in peace, Grandpa. My name is Hannah, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee with my dog, Scout. Scout is my whole world. An Alaskan Klee with a mostly dark coat but streaks of white fur along his legs and face, plus little rings of black fur around his icy blue eyes that make him look like a masked bandit. I adopted him from a shelter as a puppy right after my fiancée left for Singapore for work. He was my comfort during the first nights alone, the ones where I couldn't bear slipping into an empty bed yet again. Years later, when my ex decided he wanted to start a family with someone he met overseas, Scout helped me survive the heartbreak. He's a strong dog, a powerhouse. While other dogs are content with regular walks, Scout needs real adventures, long hikes, deep into the wilderness. That's why, for the past few years, we've spent every weekend driving out to Cherokee National Forest, one of the few places he could truly be free. Dogs aren't meant to live cooped up inside. They need to run, to roam, to explore. And truth be told, so did I. The forest was my escape, a place where I could forget the pressures of my demanding career. It was my sanctuary. But that all changed one chilly autumn day when I learned the hard way why humans built cities and walls. Because the wilderness, it isn't always our friend. Scout was always his happiest out there. For such a regal-looking animal, he had a talent for acting silly, and being in the woods only magnified that. His eyes would go wide, tongue flopping out the side of his mouth, zooming around like an excited puppy. I couldn't help but laugh at his antics. So when his playful energy suddenly vanished, I noticed right away. His tail tucked low, his ears flattened, and he refused to stray more than a few feet from my side. His body trembled under my hand when I reached down to pet him. It was fear, pure and simple. My first thought was a mountain lion, but we'd encountered a predator before, and Scout had responded by barking furiously, his whole stance aggressive. This was different. This was terror. A more likely culprit came to mind. The previous summer had seen an increase in black bear sightings, with rangers warning visitors to be extra cautious. Maybe Scout had picked up the scent of a mother bear with cubs. If that was the case, his fear was justified, but this wasn't just caution. He was petrified. One thing was clear. Scout wanted out, and so did I. But there was a problem. We were deep in the forest, at least 2 hours from the car. Getting back wouldn't be quick or easy, and with every step, the tension grew worse. Scout kept glancing behind us, eyes wild, then bolting ahead before running back to me, whining. Every footstep quickened. My paranoia climbed to unbearable heights as I kept glancing over my shoulder and seeing nothing. But something was there. Scout knew it, and I could feel it. Then he froze. His body stiffened, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. A moment later, he let out a sharp, ear-splitting yelp and bolted forward, tearing through the trees with a frenzy I had never seen before. And that's when I heard it. A sound in the trees behind me. Breathing. Deep, heavy, and far too big to be human. Panic exploded through me. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, branches slashing at my face, lungs burning. Fear unlike anything I'd ever felt gripped me, because I knew without a doubt that I was being hunted. Scout's barks kept me going. His voice was my lifeline, guiding me through the woods. Then, suddenly, I burst through a thick cluster of bushes and saw him. standing frozen at the edge of a river. It wasn't wide, but it was enough of an obstacle to stop him. You see, Scout hated water. I never knew why, but he refused to go near lakes or rivers no matter what. Terror clenched my chest. We had to get across. Acting on instinct, I leaped over. My legs barely made the jump, but I landed, stumbling onto the opposite bank. I turned, my voice breaking as I called for Scout. "Come on, boy. Please. You can do it." His blue eyes met mine, wide and desperate. He paced the edge, torn between his deepest fear and the danger behind him. Then he made his choice. He spun around and bolted back into the trees. My stomach dropped. He was running straight toward the thing chasing us. I stood there, helpless, heart hammering against my ribs. But then he reappeared, bursting from the underbrush at full speed. He launched himself into the air, sailing over the river. His massive eyes shone, his expression a mix of fear and determination. He barely made it. Scrambling at the loose dirt, he started slipping backward. I lunged, grabbing his collar, and hauled him onto solid ground. We didn't stop running. I was sobbing, gasping, my body screaming in protest. My legs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. Then my body gave out. I collapsed, my head spinning, my vision flashing silver. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die. When I woke up, I was in the back seat of a pickup truck. A voice outside shouted, "She's awake!" A stranger in hunting gear appeared, offering me a water bottle. I grabbed it, gulping it down in huge swallows. Then panic hit me. "Scout!" I croaked. The hunter's face softened. "He's fine. He's inside, getting some food." Relief flooded me, and for the first time that day, I truly cried. Apparently, Scout had refused to leave my side. No matter how much the hunters coaxed him, he wouldn't budge. He just stayed next to me, waiting for me to wake up. I sat in their cabin, regaining my strength, telling them what had happened. When I asked what they thought it was, an awkward silence filled the room. They exchanged glances before one finally muttered, "We don't know." I could tell they were lying. These men, seasoned hunters, knew something, but they wouldn't tell me. Grizzlies don't live anywhere near Tennessee, and yet, something had chased us through those woods. Something massive. I've spent hours researching, trying to figure it out, but I still don't have answers. And as long as people keep disappearing in those forests, I don't think I ever will. Scout is curled up beside me as I write this, ever faithful, ever watching, and I don't know how I'll ever manage without him. Hey everyone, my name is Emily. I live in the Pacific Northwest, in the lush green state of Oregon, to be specific. One of my resolutions for 2019 was to shed the extra weight I had put on during my first pregnancy. Weight that had drained my confidence and left me feeling sluggish. My husband always reassured me that he loved me regardless, but I cared about it. Maybe it sounds a little old-fashioned, but I wanted to look my best for him, just like he put effort into looking good for me. The problem was, I never liked the atmosphere at mixed-gender gyms. Some places seemed more like social clubs than workout spaces, and many women-only gyms were so poorly maintained that they weren't worth the membership fee. So I decided to start hiking instead. I figured being out in nature would do wonders for my mental health, and I had already found that walking in the woods helped me combat postnatal depression. It was incredibly effective. I still remember the excitement I felt driving to a sporting goods store to pick up a sturdy pair of hiking boots, along with plenty of colorful waterproof gear. Mostly in lavender, my favorite color. Felt like the beginning of something great. I was already posting in an online hiking forum, asking for recommendations on the best gear, eager to share my progress. But my first real solo hike turned out to be anything but peaceful or uplifting. Instead, it left me with a newfound respect for the sheer power of nature. My husband and I agreed that he would watch our baby while I headed out for an afternoon hike at Cascade National Forest. For the first hour or so, everything was perfect. I pushed myself up the hills, feeling the satisfying burn in my legs, then the relief as I descended. Felt amazing, invigorating and freeing. That was until I took a bad step. I must have caught my boot on a hidden rock or root because, before I knew it, I was tumbling to the ground. I hit the dirt hard, clutching my ankle and wincing from the pain. Thankfully, I could still put some weight on it, so I knew it wasn't broken, but the throbbing was intense. Then, something truly unexpected happened. A small, black-feathered crow fluttered down from a tree and landed on a nearby stump. It flapped its wings and hopped around, cawing loudly like it was trying to get my attention. It almost seemed like it had seen me fall and was checking to see if I was okay. As soon as I reassured it aloud, saying, "I'm fine," just gave myself a scare. It quieted down and simply observed me, tilting its head. My ankle still ached, but I managed to stand up and say goodbye to my new crow friend before starting my slow, limping walk back to my car. That's when something even stranger happened. The crow followed me. Every few steps, it would hop to the next tree, keeping close, cawing occasionally as if to remind me it was still there. It was honestly a comfort. My fall had shaken my confidence, but knowing I had a tiny companion made me feel oddly protected. Nature, in its own way, had a gentle side too. However, the pain in my ankle worsened as it started to swell. With the pain came a wave of frustration, and for some reason, it brought back memories of childbirth. Sitting on a fallen log, trying to rest, I suddenly burst into tears. I must have looked so pitiful, a woman crying in the middle of the woods. But then my little crow companion swooped down again, hopping around and cawing in concern. Felt like something out of a storybook. But then, the fairy tale moment turned into something much darker. I heard movement in the trees up the slope, about 100 yards away. Something large, something breathing heavily. And then, I saw it. A massive brown bear, fresh out of hibernation and clearly starving. At first, I thought my crow friend was trying to warn me, as it started flapping around again, calling even louder. But I was wrong, so very wrong. The bear locked eyes with me and started charging down the slope. My heart nearly stopped, but thankfully I had come prepared. One of the best tips my online hiking group had given me was to carry a strong can of bear spray. With trembling hands, I pulled it out, flipped off the safety, and sprayed a thick cloud of burning yellow mist into the air between me and the oncoming bear. For a moment, I was terrified it wouldn't work, that the bear would push through, too hungry to care. But as soon as it ran into the mist, it stopped abruptly, shaking its head, sneezing violently, and stumbling back in confusion. I didn't stick around to admire my work. I ran until my ankle felt like it might burst. Some small stroke of luck guided me back to my car, and somehow, I made it home in one piece. Later, when I recounted the story, I did some research. What I had believed was a sweet friendship between me and the crow turned out to be something else entirely. Crows have a peculiar relationship with predators like bears. When they spot an injured or vulnerable animal, they don't call out in concern. They do it to alert a nearby predator, leading them straight to an easy meal. That crow hadn't been protecting me. It had been marking me as prey. One of the tallest volcanoes in all of Asia and one of the most revered locations in Japan, this mountain stands as a cultural emblem. On clear days, those going about their routines in Tokyo can glimpse its perfectly symmetrical, snow-capped peak far in the distance. The mountain frequently appears in artwork and photography, often featured on Japanese postcards that are sent across the globe each year. But on the northwestern side of this iconic peak, covering roughly 230 square kilometers of solidified lava, lies a forest called Aokigahara, sometimes referred to as the Sea of Trees. This dense woodland can be eerily quiet due to its lava-based terrain, which is known for absorbing sound. This silence lends the area an overwhelming sense of isolation, making it a well-known site for activities such as hiking and camping. However, Aokigahara is also infamous for a far more somber reason. The forest carries a deep-rooted history in Japanese folklore, often linked with spirits known as yurei, ghosts of those who have passed. This reputation stems from a harsh reality. Aokigahara has long been associated with tragic events, earning a grim label as a place where individuals choose to end their lives. Each year, a significant number of men and women enter the forest with no intention of returning. The frequency of such incidents has led Japanese officials to post signs at various entry points, urging visitors to consider their families and seek help through prevention hotlines. In 2003 alone, over 100 bodies were discovered in the woods, a rise from the previous year's count of 78. By 2010, more than 200 individuals had attempted to take their lives in the forest, with over 50 of them succeeding, despite warnings and intervention efforts. The most common methods found deep within Aokigahara are overdoses and hangings, though investigators occasionally discover other, more unusual approaches. Annual searches conducted by police, volunteers, and journalists have revealed the extent of this tragic phenomenon. Disturbingly, data shows that these incidents increase in March, coinciding with the end of Japan's financial year, a particularly stressful time for many business workers. In an attempt to curb the forest's notoriety as a suicide destination, local officials have tried to limit the public release of statistics. Aokigahara's dark reputation has been partly attributed to a 1961 novel by Saicho Matsumoto titled Nami no To, Tower of Waves in English. The book tells the tragic tale of a couple who, realizing they can never be together happily, venture into the forest to end their lives. It remains one of Japan's most famous romantic novels, though it cannot be solely blamed for the forest's association with death. Another book, written by Wataru Tsurumi, further fueled the discussion. Published on July 4, 1993, Kanzen Jizatsu Manuaru, The Complete Manual of Suicide, sold over 1 million copies within Japan's literary market. In his postscript, Tsurumi argued that by acknowledging that an escape exists, people might find life more bearable. He insisted that the book was not meant to encourage suicide, but rather to challenge the societal pressure to endure hardships. However, its content, which evaluates various methods based on pain levels, likelihood of success, and potential consequences, made it highly controversial upon release. Despite the influence of these books, Aokigahara's link to death predates both publications. The forest has long been connected to an old Japanese practice called ubasut, which translates to abandoning an elderly woman. In historical times, a frail or elderly relative would sometimes be carried into a remote location, left there to perish. Though this practice faded in most societies, it persisted in Japan well into the 19th century, further cementing the forest's haunted reputation. The belief that spirits of the forsaken remain there only adds to its eerie allure. In more recent years, efforts to keep attention away from the forest have been largely undone by modern media. One major incident that reignited global interest was a controversial video uploaded by American YouTuber Logan Paul. While visiting Japan, he filmed a video in Aokigahara that included the body of an apparent suicide victim. Paul and his group were visibly shocked upon making the discovery, but their subsequent reactions, including what many perceived as inappropriate humor, sparked massive backlash online. Though the video was swiftly removed, it had already amassed millions of views, leading to a widespread public outcry. The victim's identity remains unknown, as Paul's team blurred out the individual's face. However, the fallout from the video was severe. YouTube removed Paul's channel from its top-tier advertising program and suspended original projects involving him, citing the disrespectful nature of the content. In Japan, the broader issue of suicide remains a troubling reality. Every year, over 25,000 people in the country take their own lives, an average of around 70 per day, with the majority being men. One particularly shocking incident occurred in 2014 when a 71-year-old man set himself on fire aboard a Japanese bullet train, once again bringing national attention to the crisis. Before igniting the flames, he reportedly warned nearby passengers to stay away, demonstrating a chilling awareness of his final act. Why do so many individuals feel compelled to choose death over life? It is a question without a clear answer, one that has been asked for centuries and will continue to be, as long as human beings struggle with despair. And as long as Aokigahara exists, those bright-colored ribbons tied to trees, left by people hoping to find their way back, will serve as reminders of the souls still searching for a path out of the darkness.